The Feast of Fools. In the Court of Miracles, Quasimodo in court. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. The 6th of January, 1482, was not a day to go down in history. But for the people of Paris, waking to the sound of bells from all over the city, it was a day they had celebrated for as long as they could remember. It was a double holiday, marking the Festival of the Three Kings and the Festival of Fools. And the high spot of the day was to be the election of the Pope of Fools. There was plenty of excitement in the air that day, with thousands of people crowding the streets. But a Flemish visitor to Paris, Jacques Copenhague, was impatient for the fun to begin. Facing the crowd, he shouted,
"Good people of Paris, what are we waiting for? I was promised a festival of fools and the election of a pope. We have a Pope of Fools in my country too, and this is how we do it. We collect a crowd, such as there is here, then everyone that likes sticks his head in turn through a hole and pulls a face at the others. The one who makes the ugliest face is chosen to be Pope. It's great fun. Shall we choose your Pope, as we do in my country? We have enough ugly faces among us to have a good laugh."
The crowd greeted the suggestion with tremendous enthusiasm. A little chapel was chosen as the scene for the face-pulling. The glass was broken in a pretty little round window, and it was agreed the competitors should stick their heads through the circle of stone that was left. The first to appear, with its red eyes and wide mouth, caused roars of laughter. A second and a third ugly face followed, and each time there was more and more laughter and stamping of feet. The faces became more and more grotesque, and more the crowd roared its delight. Then a face appeared at the window that caused screams of approval. A face of the most sublime ugliness, a face that is almost too difficult to describe. A giant head covered with red bristles, a mouth shaped like a horseshoe, and a right eye that was completely buried beneath a giant wart. It was a face that showed both spite and sadness. Everyone agreed this was indeed the one to become the blessed Pope of Fools. It was only on closer inspection that they realized the ugly grimace was his ordinary face. Then this sort of cyclops appeared at the entrance to the chapel. He was almost as broad as he was high. The crowd immediately recognized him from his coat, half red and half purple, and by his perfect ugliness. With one voice they cried out,
It's Quasimodo, the bell ringer!
It's Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame!
Quasimodo, the one-eyed!
Quasimodo, the bandy-legged!
The poor fellow, it seems, had plenty of nicknames to choose from. Jacques Coppenole, astonished at the sight, approached him.
Why,
He said,
you are the finest piece of ugliness I have ever seen.
When Quasimodo did not reply, he shouted,
What? Are you deaf?
Quasimodo was indeed deaf. Quasimodo was beginning to feel annoyed at Coppenole. He suddenly turned on him with such a ferocious grin that the Flemish giant jumped back like a bulldog from a cat. An old woman shouted to Coppenole that Quasimodo was deaf.
He's deaf!
Deaf?
He cried.
Why then, he'll make the perfect Pope.
Next, Jacques Coppenole presented Quasimodo with the cardboard crown and the mock robes of the Pope of Fools. Then the bell ringer let himself be taken in procession through the streets of Paris. The celebrations went on long into the night. In one of the city squares, a huge bonfire blazed magnificently, and a crowd of people had gathered round it. But it was not only the warmth that had attracted the spectators. In the space that was left between the crowd and the fire, a young girl was dancing. She was not tall, but was slender and elegant. As she whirled around, her black eyes flashed like lightning. Every eye was fixed on her. Every mouth was open as she danced to the sound of a tambourine held above her head by two beautifully shaped arms. Among the thousands of faces illuminated by the fire was one which was intently fixed on the dancer. It was the face of a man calm and somber. He looked no more than 35 years old, yet he was bald with a few scanty tufts of grey hair.
Jolly?
said the girl, and a pretty white goat with gilt horns and gilt collar trotted up to her.
Now it's your turn.
She said, holding out her tambourine.
What month is it?
She asked. The goat raised its foreleg and struck once on the tambourine. The crowd clapped. It was indeed the first month of the year.
Now, Jolly,
said the girl, holding out the tambourine again.
what day of the month is this?
Again the goat raised its golden hoof, and this time it struck the tambourine 6 times. The people clapped all the louder, and silver and copper coins of all sizes began falling at her feet.
There's witchcraft at the bottom of this,
said a sinister voice in the crowd. It was the bald man who had never once taken his eyes off the gypsy. Meanwhile, into the square came the procession headed by the new Pope of Fools, the bell ringer of Notre Dame, Quasimodo the Hunchback. Deaf as he was, he joyfully acknowledged the cheers that greeted him. His unhappy face beamed with delight. Suddenly, a man darted from the crowd and snatched the gilt wooden crozier from Quasimodo's hands. It was the man who had been watching the gypsy girl dance. He was immediately recognized as none other than the Archdeacon of Notre Dame. Shrieks of terror came from the crowd, for they quite expected to see him torn to pieces by the one-eyed monster. Instead, Quasimodo dropped to his knees and let the priest pull off the golden crown and tear away the cape of tinsel. Then the priest told him to rise, and the 2 men walked away. Late on the night of the Festival of Fools, the gypsy girl was making her way along one of the narrow streets of the city when she was pounced on by 2 men. One was Quasimodo. Picking up the screaming girl, he threw her over his arm like a scarf. Then he started to make off into the shadows, with his companion about to follow. The poor goat started running after all 3, bleating plaintively.
Murder! Murder!
The unfortunate girl cried at the top of her voice. Suddenly, a voice like thunder roared, "Halt, scoundrels, and let her go!" It was the captain of the king's archers. Flourishing his sword, the soldier snatched the girl from Quasimodo and placed her gently on the ground. Before he was able to recover from his surprise, the hunchback was quickly seized and trussed up. Meanwhile, his companion had disappeared into the night. The girl looked gratefully at the man who had saved her.
What is your name?
She asked. Phoebus de Chateaupert, said the soldier.
Thank you.
She said. Then she too vanished like a streak of lightning. "16 years before the start of this story, after Mass one fine Sunday morning, a living creature was laid in the wooden bed that stood in the porch of Notre Dame. It was the habit of people to leave unwanted children here. Anyone who liked to take them away could do so. The creature who lay on this hard couch that morning in the year of our Lord 1467 was the object of much curiosity among the old women who crowded round it.
Whatever is that, sister?
Said one, staring at the ugly little creature. It lay squealing and wriggling on the wooden bed.
What can the world be coming to?
Said another.
If that is the way they make children nowadays. I don't know that much about children,
Said the first.
but it must be a sin to even look at that thing.
A young priest had been listening to the arguments of the women, a man with a large forehead and a piercing look in his eyes. Pushing the women aside, he said,
I adopt this child.
Then he carefully wrapped him in his cassock and carried him away. They watched him go with horror. By the year 1482, Quasimodo had grown up. He was now the bell ringer of Notre Dame, thanks to his foster father, Archdeacon Claude Frollo. Over the years, a strong bond had formed between the bell ringer and the great cathedral. Cut off from the world by his unknown birth and his deformity, it was as if he'd been imprisoned within its walls from infancy. So Quasimodo grew up in harmony with the church, living in it, sleeping in it, hardly ever leaving it. There was no depth he had not penetrated, no height he had not scaled. Many times he had climbed, lizard-like, up the outside of the cathedral, helped only by the stone carvings. By leaping, scrambling among the precipices, he was more like a monkey or a mountain goat. For Quasimodo, this gigantic cathedral held no terrors. This was his home, the only one he knew. The cathedral was peopled with figures of marble, with kings, saints, and bishops. They never burst out laughing in his face. They showed no hatred for Quasimodo. They were too much like him themselves for that. The saints were his friends and blessed him. The monsters were his friends and guarded him. Quasimodo had been born one-eyed, hunchbacked, and lame. Now, as bell ringer of Notre Dame, a new disability afflicted him, for the bells had ruptured his eardrums. He had become completely deaf. Yet it was the bells themselves that he loved most of all in that vast cathedral. He caressed the bells. He talked to them. Theirs were the only voices he could still hear. Altogether, he had 15 bells to look after, but he loved most of all the great bell called Marie. The moment the archdeacon said,
Go on.
he would run up the winding staircase in the belfry, quicker than another man could run down. Then he would shout to his assistants at the base of the tower to begin. They pulled the ropes, and slowly the huge metal bell began to move. As its swing increased, Quasimodo vibrated with excitement, and the grand peal began. The whole tower seemed to tremble. The great bell swung to and fro, and Quasimodo crouched down and rose up to its rhythm. His movements became as frenzied as the bells. Suddenly, he leapt straight towards the bell. He seized the brass monster, and with the whole weight and force of his body increased the fury of the peal. Magistrates never liked the day after a public holiday when they had to deal with a string of offenders. This particular magistrate was the provost of Paris. The prisoner standing silently in front of him was Quasimodo. Now and then his only eye glanced angrily at the bonds that bound him. The provost said to Quasimodo,
What have you done to be here, scoundrel?
The prisoner, thinking he was being asked his name, replied,
Quasimodo!
There was laughter in the courtroom. The magistrate, red with rage, said,
Are you playing a game with me? Bell ringer at Notre Dame,
replied Quasimodo.
Bell ringer?
Roared the provost.
I'll have such a peal rung on your back you'll never forget it. Do you hear me, rascal? If you want to know my age, I think I shall be 20 next Martinmas,
said Quasimodo. Quasimodo's answers caused the magistrate to lose all patience.
What?
He shouted.
Do you dare defy the provost? Guards, take this fellow to the pillory. Let him be flogged, and then turn him on the wheel for an hour. He shall pay for this insolence.
One of the spectators cried out,
God's belly! It's a just sentence!
The provost lifted up his head to stare angrily at Quasimodo.
I truly believe that the knave has dared to swear at us,
he said.
Clerk, for that oath, let him have an extra hour on the pillory, added to the sentence.
Through it all, Quasimodo looked on as though he hadn't a care in the world. The pillory in the Place de Grève consisted of a cube of masonry some 10 feet high and hollow within. Quasimodo, stripped to the waist and with his arms bound behind him, was pushed up the rough flight of stone steps that led to the upper platform. Waiting for him was a horizontal wheel of solid oak, on which he was forced to kneel and tightly strapped. Then the wheel started rotating, presenting the condemned man's face to each corner of the square. This was called turning a criminal. A crowd gathered to watch, booing and laughing. The same crowd in the same square where the day before Quasimodo had been acclaimed as the Pope of Fools. Another man now climbed the steps to the platform carrying a whip made of long, plaited thongs. He was Master Pierre Torterue, the public torturer. Each time the turning wheel brought Quasimodo round to Master Torterue, he raised his arm. The thin lash hissed sharply through the air and fell with fury on the back of the helpless victim. When the torment was finally over and the torturer had left the platform, poor Quasimodo remained bound to the wheel. Now it was left to the citizens of Paris to add to his suffering. Boos and insults rained down on him. Quasimodo looked round the crowd with hatred in his one eye. He struggled in his bonds, but could not break them. Then he broke his silence and in a hoarse voice cried, "Water!" Then a young girl pushed her way through the crowd. She was followed by a little white goat with golden horns. Quasimodo watched her suspiciously. It was the gypsy girl he had tried to abduct the night before. He thought she was coming to take revenge and to add her blows like the others. Anger and rage choked him. Without saying a word, she slowly approached the victim, who vainly twisted to avoid her. Then, taking a gourd from her belt, she gently lifted it to his parched lips. A big tear started to roll down from his bloodshot eye, which had been dry until then. It trickled down his deformed face, so long distorted by despair. Then she pressed the neck of the gourd between Quasimodo's jagged teeth. He drank greedily, for he had a burning thirst. When he had finished, he tried to kiss the lovely hand, but the girl pulled it away. Several weeks later, on a sunny spring day, several pretty young ladies could be seen chatting on the stone balcony of a handsome house opposite Notre Dame. They were joined by a gentleman who wore the brilliant uniform of Captain of the King's Archers. Suddenly, one of the girls cried,
Look down there, at that pretty girl dancing on the pavement and playing a tambourine. Could that be the gypsy you rescued from the hands of a dozen robbers?
Captain Phoebus de Chateaupert looked down into the square and said, Yes, I recognize her by her coat.
Good cousin Phoebus,
cried the girl.
Since you know this gypsy, call her to come up here. It will amuse us.
Phoebus went to call the girl. All eyes were on Esmeralda when she came into the room, followed by the goat with the golden horns. The captain was the first to speak. What a charming creature, he said. Do you remember me?
Oh, yes,
she said. You slipped away in such a hurry that night. Did I frighten you? He asked.
Oh, no,
said the gypsy. The captain went on. You left me with a one-eyed hunchback fellow, the bishop's bell-ringer, I'm told. But he paid dearly for what he did. Master Pierre Torterou curried the bell-ringer's hide most soundly.
Poor fellow,
said Esmeralda. Meanwhile, the lady of the house was more interested in the goat. She noticed a little bag hanging from its neck. To satisfy her curiosity, she opened it and emptied its contents on the floor. They were wooden letters of the alphabet. No sooner were they spread out than the goat pushed certain letters with its golden hoof to make up a word. Phoebus. At the fine lady's cry of alarm, the gypsy saw what had happened, turned pale and began to tremble.
She is a sorceress!
Cried the lady.
Begone, you gypsy from hell!
Archdeacon Claude was sitting in his cell in the tower when a visitor arrived. It was the king's lawyer.
Good day, Master Jacques,
he said.
Good day, answered the lawyer. Where would you like me to order that little sorceress to be arrested?
What sorceress?
Asked Claude.
A gypsy who comes to dance in the square every day despite the official order forbidding it. She has a goat which is possessed of the devil. It has the devil's own horns. It reads and writes and understands mathematics. In fact, it is enough to hang all the gypsies in Paris. The case is all ready. When shall we start?
Claude went pale.
I'll tell you when the time has come,
he said. The people of Paris liked nothing more than a good criminal trial. They crowded into the great chamber. The long, pointed windows only let in a faint light. Candles on the tables threw their light on the heads of clerks poring over heaps of papers. At one end of the hall, on a raised platform, was a line of judges with immovable and sinister-looking faces, and standing before them was the sad figure of Esmeralda. The prosecutor, Master Jacques Chamelou, said,
Bring in the second prisoner.
A small door opened, and in came a goat with golden horns and hoofs. It caught sight of the gypsy girl and jumped over a table and the head of a clerk. In 2 leaps it was at her knees, inviting a caress.
If it pleases you, my lords,
began Master Jacques,
let us proceed to the examination of the goat.
It was common in those days to put an animal on trial for sorcery.
If the demon within this goat persists in its wickedness and shocks the court, then we warn it that we shall be forced to sentence it to the gallows or the stake,
he said. He picked up the gypsy's tambourine and held it to the goat.
What time is it?
He asked. The goat looked at it, raised its gilt hoof, and knocked 7 times. It was indeed 7 o'clock. A ripple of terror went through the crowd. The same spectators who had applauded the innocent pranks of Jolly in the streets were horror-struck to see them performed in the courtroom. The goat was definitely the devil. Then the prosecutor took the leather pouch that hung around the goat's neck and emptied out the letters. With its hoof, the goat spelled the name Phoebus. It was obvious now that the gypsy was an odious witch. Esmeralda stood there with no sign of life. Only vaguely did she hear a chilling voice pronounce the fatal words.
Gypsy girl, on such a day as it please our lord the king, at the hour of noon, you will be taken barefoot, a rope round your neck, before the great door of Notre Dame, and there you will be hanged, and your goat likewise, for sorcery and magic. May God have mercy on your soul.
Esmeralda did not know how long she had been kept a prisoner in the dungeon far beneath the Palace of Justice. All she had was a little straw to lie on, a jug of water, and a loaf of bread. She no longer knew the difference between waking and sleeping or between night and day. Then a ray of light fell on her, and the heavy iron door creaked. A lantern was placed on the floor, and she saw a human form standing before her, dressed all in black.
Who are you?
She asked.
A priest.
The figure answered.
Are you prepared?
For what?
Asked the girl.
To die.
Said the priest.
Will it be soon?
She asked.
Tomorrow.
He replied. All at once she burst out crying.
I want to get out of here.
She sobbed.
I'm cold. I'm afraid. And there are horrible creatures that climb up me.
Then come with me.
Said the priest, pushing back his hood.
I love you.
He sank onto his knees.
Ever since I saw you dancing in the square, I felt a mysterious spell on me. It was witchcraft, I know. One night, I determined to carry you off. There were 2 of us, but then a stupid officer came up and rescued you. Next, I hoped that the law would break the charm, so I denounced you. Have pity on me.
He crawled towards her.
I can help you escape. Only say you love me. But let us lose no time.
He jumped up and seized her arm, but she pushed him towards the door.
Go, monster! Let me die!
She shouted.
I could never be yours. I only want Phoebus.
The priest picked up his lantern and went to the door, and darkness returned.
I want to get out of here.
She sobbed.
I'm cold. I'm afraid. And there are horrible...
The square in front of Notre Dame was filled with an immense crowd which flowed back into nearby streets. The clock slowly struck the hour of noon, and a murmur of satisfaction came from the crowd. Then came the cry of, "There she is!" A cart drawn by a powerful Norman horse came into the square. Seated in it was the young gypsy, her arms tied behind her. At her feet was the little goat, bound like its mistress. The cart stopped in front of the cathedral, and the crowd fell silent. The executioner untied her arms and helped her from the cart. The goat was also untied and followed her. In bare feet, she started walking towards the steps leading into Notre Dame. The rope round her neck trailed behind her. A figure waited for her at the door of the cathedral. It was the archdeacon. Esmeralda shuddered. In a loud voice, he said,
Girl, have you prayed to God to pardon you for your crimes?
Then he stooped, putting his head close to hers. The crowd thought it was to hear her last confession. Instead, he whispered,
Will you be mine? I can still save you.
She looked him straight in the eye.
Go to the devil, your master,
She said.
or I will denounce you.
He gave a horrible grin.
They will not believe you.
He replied,
Answer quickly. Will you have me?
There was no response.
Very well. Die, then.
He snapped.
No one will have you.
Then he lifted his hand over her head and said loudly,
Go now, and may God be merciful to you.
This was the signal the executioner was waiting for. No one had noticed a silent spectator in the Gallery of Kings just above the pointed arches of the doorway. He was so motionless, his head so outstretched, his face so deformed, that but for his costume, half red and half purple, he could have been taken for one of those stone monsters through whose mouths the cathedral's long gutters had been emptying for the last 600 years. He had missed no part of the tragedy that had been enacted before the porch of Notre Dame. From the very first moments, unobserved, he had securely tied a knotted rope to one of the small pillars of the gallery. At the moment when the executioner was preparing to take Esmeralda away, he seized the rope with his feet, knees, and hand, then slid silently down the wall. With the swiftness of a cat, he ran to the executioner, felled him with his enormous fist, picked up the gypsy as one would a doll, and with one bound was in the cathedral, shouting, "Sanctuary!" Quasimodo paused under the great porch and looked back. His large feet seemed as firmly rooted in the pavement of the cathedral as its massive pillars. He held the trembling girl hanging limply from his rough hands, carrying her with care as if afraid of hurting her. On the square, the crowd was shouting again and again, "Sanctuary! Sanctuary!" They knew that within the walls of Notre Dame, the condemned girl could not be touched. It was a place of refuge. Human law dared not cross its threshold. Then Esmeralda opened her eyes. She looked at Quasimodo and immediately closed them again as if horror-struck at the sight of her deliverer. Quasimodo clasped her closely in his arms. She was his treasure. His single eye looked down on her and showered her with tenderness and pity. The crowd stamped their feet with enthusiasm. Quasimodo felt himself proud and strong. He, the lowest of the low, had snatched the victim from the executioners, the judges, all the might of the King of France. He turned and went into the church with his burden. In seconds, he had disappeared from sight. Minutes later, he was seen on the gallery of the kings of France, running along it like a maniac, raising his conquest up in his arms and shouting, "Sanctuary!" More applause greeted him. He disappeared inside again, then reappeared on the upper platform, still bearing the gypsy in his arms and still shouting, "Sanctuary!" Then he made his third appearance on the top of the tower of the great bell. His thundering voice, the voice that was heard so seldom, the voice which he himself could never hear, made the air ring with the thrice-repeated shout of "Sanctuary! Sanctuary! Sanctuary!" Esmeralda Esmeralda woke from her faint to find herself in a cell about 6 feet square. She turned to Quasimodo.
Why did you save me?
She asked. He looked at her anxiously, as if trying to guess what she was saying. Then he gave her a sad look and went out. Only a few moments later he was back, carrying a basket of food under one arm and a mattress under the other. He set down the basket and said,
Eat.
He spread out the mattress on the stone floor and said,
Sleep.
It was his own dinner, his own bed, that the bell ringer had brought her. The gypsy tried to thank him, but couldn't say a word. He looked so hideous that she lowered her head.
I frighten you, don't I?
Said Quasimodo.
Don't look at me, but listen. In the daytime, you must stay here. But at night, you can walk about anywhere. But do not leave the cathedral day or night, or they will catch you and kill you. And me, too.
Unknown to Esmeralda, Parliament issued a decree that would allow soldiers to enter the cathedral and deliver her back to the executioner. But Parliament hadn't counted on the city's gypsies, pickpockets, and beggars. When they heard what was planned, they were determined to take the law into their own hands. That night, there was a bustle of activities in the Court of Miracles in that part of Paris known as the City of Thieves. Groups of people gathered together, sharpening swords, polishing axes, arming themselves with every kind of weapon they could lay their hands on.
That poor Esmeralda.
One gypsy was saying,
She's our sister. We must get her out of Notre Dame before it is too late.
Finally, another voice called out,
Midnight.
At this signal, men, women, and children set out for Notre Dame, their weapons glistening in the dark. That same night, Quasimodo could not sleep. He had done his last rounds and glanced at his silent bells. Now he put down his lantern and looked out over the sleeping rooftops of the city. For some days he had felt uneasy. He had seen suspicious-looking men prowling about the cathedral. He imagined some plot was afoot that could hurt the gypsy, that the hatred of the people might be directed against her as it was against himself. So he stood on the tower like a good guard dog, with his heart full of distrust. As he swept the great city with his one piercing eye, he sensed that something odd was about to happen. There seemed to be a movement in the darkness like the waves of a river, or the heads of a moving crowd. Suddenly, a light appeared, and in an instant, dozens of other torches burst into flame, illuminating a frightful rabble of men and women in rags, armed with scythes, pikes, and pickaxes. The mob surged towards the great doors of the cathedral. Their leaders ran up the steps and set to work with sledgehammers and crowbars. The doors, however, stood firm.
It's tough and obstinate,
Cried one.
It's old and its joints are stiff,
Said another. Then, with an enormous crash, a huge beam of wood fell from the skies, then rebounded into the square like the noise of a cannon.
We needed a battering ram,
shouted a ruffian.
Well, here it is.
With that, willing hands seized the beam and smashed it against the door. The whole cathedral seemed to shudder, but the door did not yield. Then, a shower of huge stones began to rain down onto the heads of the attackers. On the roof of one of the towers of Notre Dame, 160 feet above the square, Quasimodo had found a complete arsenal with which to fight off the mob. He had remembered that masons had been working there, repairing the wall. Everywhere were piles of stones, rolls of lead, massive beams, heaps of gravel, even the workmen's tool bags. Everything he could lay his hands on went crashing down onto the heads below. But Quasimodo realized that this ammunition would not last forever. Then, he spotted two long stone rain spouts which disgorged themselves immediately over the great door. He knew what he had to do. Quasimodo saw that both of the rain spouts started from the floor near him. He set to work, darting here and there about the platform, and quickly made a pile of builder's rubble and small pieces of wood. Then he went to collect rolls of lead, ammunition he had not yet used, which he also laid on the pyre. When all was ready, he set fire to the heap with his lantern. He looked over the parapet and saw the ringleaders were grouping themselves for a last effort to break down the doors. These were now badly splintered and unlikely to resist any further blows of the battering ram. Just then, the lead began to melt. Down in the square, all eyes were suddenly raised to the top of Notre Dame. They saw an extraordinary sight. On the uppermost gallery above the central rose window, a vast sheet of flame, accompanied by a shower of sparks, rose between the two towers. Below this flame, below the somber balustrade with its carvings glowing red, two spouts in the shape of monsters' jaws began spewing out streams of molten lead. As they neared the ground, the two streams merged into showers of spray like water, spurting from the countless holes of a watering can, drenching the screaming crowd below. The stone devils and dragons carved onto the walls of Notre Dame seemed to come alive in the flickering flames. Gorgons seemed to be laughing, salamanders puffing fire, griffins sneezing in the smoke. And among the monsters thus wakened from their sleep of stone, there was one that could be seen from time to time moving in front of the fire like a bat before a candle. The leaders of the mob pulled back to discuss what they might do next.
It's impossible to break in,
said one of them.
The church is enchanted. We'll never get in through that door,
said another.
We'll have to find another way.
Just then, a group of men arrived dragging a long ladder. Their leader said,
See that group of statues looking like idiots? That's the Gallery of the Kings of France. And at the end of it is a door which is always unlocked. That's our way into Notre Dame.
They quickly raised the ladder up to the gallery, and the first man started to climb, holding the rungs with one hand and his crossbow with the other. When he reached the gallery, 60 feet above the ground, he swung nimbly onto the balcony and let out a yell of joy. Suddenly he stopped, struck dumb with horror. Crouching in the dark behind one of the royal statues was Quasimodo, his eye flashing fire. Before the second of the besiegers could jump from the ladder onto the gallery, Quasimodo sprang forward. Without saying a word, he caught hold of the top of the ladder and pushed it from the wall with superhuman force. The ladder, bending under the weight of the men still climbing up it, reared in the air for a moment, then crashed down into the square amid cries of anguish. The man on the gallery, trying to hide behind one of the stone kings, watched, horrified. Then Quasimodo leapt on the man, lifted him into the air, and sent him flying over the balustrade. A cry of horror went up from the ruffians as they saw what Quasimodo had done.
Vengeance!
They cried.
Storm the cathedral!
They were filled with shame at having all their efforts repulsed by a hunchback. Some found more ladders, others knotted ropes, and those that could find neither started swarming up the face of Notre Dame by clinging to the sculptures. They were shouting, yelling, and swearing as they climbed. No one could hold out against this rising tide of grim faces now closing in on Quasimodo. He knew he would be powerless to hold out any longer against so many enemies. Then from the distance came the sound of horses as Captain Phoebus de Chateaupert rode into the square at the head of his soldiers. Meanwhile, Esmeralda was already making her escape through a door at the back of Notre Dame. Her figure, muffled from top to toe in black, stopped her.
Quick,
he said, grabbing her arm.
You are in the greatest danger.
Then he began pulling her along, and she realized they were making for the Place de Grève.
Who are you?
She asked. He stopped and raised his cowl. She froze with horror. It was the priest again.
Listen,
said the Archdeacon.
This is the Grève. We go no further. Parliament has decreed you should go back to the gallows. I have rescued you from their hands, but they are still searching for you. Look.
The rumblings of the search and the torches seemed to be getting nearer.
I have aided your escape because I love you,
he said.
Let me complete the work. I can save you. Everything is prepared. If you wish it, it will be done.
She looked at the gallows. Coldly, he said,
You must choose between the two of us.
Then she looked over her shoulder at the priest.
I feel less horror of that than of you,
she said. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed uncontrollably. Then he said,
I do not want you to die. Just say one word of kindness.
You are a hateful, poisonous monk.
she answered.
You are old. You are ugly. Go away.
He let out a violent cry.
Die then!
He shouted. Quasimodo ran into every part of the great cathedral trying to find Esmeralda. He ended up at the highest point of Notre Dame. He sat there and sobbed. But they were sobs without tears. Then he remembered that only one person had the key to the staircase leading to Esmeralda's cell. It was Claude Frollo. So it must have been him who had taken the girl from him. He was filled with fury. The priest and the gypsy clashed in his heart. Then the archdeacon himself appeared on the roof. He walked slowly to the balustrade that surrounds the platform. Then he leaned over it and stared into the distance. Quasimodo crept silently behind him to see what it was he was looking at. Paris, viewed from the towers of Notre Dame in the cool dawn of a summer morning, is a magnificent sight. But the priest stared in one direction only, to the Place de Grève. Quasimodo followed his line of sight. Then he saw the gallows, and he saw a man dragging something white across the square. He knew it was Esmeralda. Suddenly the archdeacon threw back his head and laughed like a demon. Quasimodo couldn't hear the laugh, but he could see it. He recoiled a few steps. Then he rushed at him in a fury. He pushed him with his two huge hands into the abyss over which he had been leaning. Then he bent over and watched him fall. Quasimodo sat on the roof, motionless as if struck by a thunderbolt. A stream of tears flowed silently from his one eye. Heaving a deep sigh, he cried,
That is all I have ever loved.
Notre Dame in